Welcome to Silberman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, episode 47, where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is December 5th, 2024, and I'm Phil Silberman, owner of the firm and your host. I'm also joined by a special guest today. Chris Heald is filling in for Austin Black as my co-host. Austin is on a little trip abroad visiting Japan, so Chris has so graciously agreed to be here. And Chris is our managing supervising attorney. He supervises all of our lawyers at the firm. So we are honored to have Mr. Hill today. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm good, Phil. Thanks for having me.
All right. So this is your first show, first episode. Are you a little nervous?
I don't think so. I guess we'll find out.
All right. Everyone's a little nervous their first time. It's okay. We've had lots of guests. I appreciate you helping out. So we usually kick it off by talking about what's on our docket today. We have our legal news section. We're going to be starting there. And we're talking about a Texas judge just a couple of days ago blocked the enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act. That's a big deal. And then next legal news topic, we're going to be talking about a bill that's just been introduced that would ban the sale of all forms of THC. Then we're going to do our legal question section, and we're going to talk about how do you keep owners of an LLC in Texas anonymous? We get a lot of calls from people wanting to stay anonymous when they're starting LLCs. So you may know that, Chris. So. And then the next legal question we're going to have is, does Texas have a state tax on business entities? Spoiler alert, yes, it does. And then finally, we've got my favorite part of the show, which is our Rant and Rave section. And we're going to be talking about Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter. And I'm not really mad about that. This is more about just how many times the Biden administration has lied about whether they would pardon Hunter Biden. That's what we're doing on the show today. Let's get it kicked off with our legal news section. And we're talking about this Corporate Transparency Act. Now, Chris, you had mentioned before the show you had not heard about the CTA. Is that right?
No, I've heard about it. What I didn't know before you told me today, I hadn't heard about the ruling on Monday.
Yeah. So let's give our listeners a little background, okay? The Corporate Transparency Act was passed by Congress to give the Department of the Treasury and then through FinCEN, and FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Congress gave that department the ability to ask all of these entities, LLCs and corporations, mostly small business entities, to be forced to disclose their ownership interest. And the idea was that by forcing small business owners and small LLCs and corporations to disclose their ownership interest, they were going to be able to better stop financial crimes. Does that sound reasonable to you, Chris?
Not for a second. No, it's more just about making their jobs easier and hoping that they can force the individual to do things that they wouldn't normally have to do.
I thought that the only people who are going to comply would be like the good guys, like the law-abiding citizens. They're the only ones that's going to report. And then all of the crooked people doing crooked things, they're not going to report anyway. So I didn't quite understand the logic behind it.
No, that makes sense.
That's what I thought was going to happen. It doesn't matter because all of these legal entities, they were required to file this BOI report, this beneficial owner's interest report, before January 1st, 2025, which is obviously now less than 30 days away. So a lot of our clients, a lot of my friends were scrambling, and they were paying like $600 or $700 to attorneys to have these reports filed. And then all of a sudden, along came a judge out of the Eastern District. Okay, this is U.S. District Judge Amos Mazant of the Eastern District of Texas. He just issued a broad sweeping injunction saying, Department of the Treasury, FinCEN, you absolutely cannot enforce this. You ever done anything up in the Eastern District?
Is that the one up in Marshall?
I think that's right. I think they've called it the Rocket Docket. It's famous for taking a bunch of IP cases.
This is what I think of when I think of IP.
So
I know they've had that reputation for a decade or more, probably well over a decade.
And This is a case that came through U.S. District Court Judge Amos Malzant says no. All right, you cannot enforce the CTA. You cannot make all of these small business owners or these business owners, these LLCs, these corporations disclose their ownership interest. And here's the court's reasoning. All right, the court says that requiring these BOI reports, Congress's powers, which are expressly defined by the U.S. Constitution, do not include a federal police power to regulate all aspects of public life. You agree or disagree with that, Chris?
I 100% agree with that. I think that's better stated than what I was saying earlier. They want to create shortcuts. It's what we learned about in law school with pretextual traffic stops, right? If you just make something so onerous that no one can comply, then every single cop has a reason to pull you over, and they get to say, oh, your mud flaps were wrong or something like that. And so now they have a reason to pull everybody over. So I wonder if it's the same thinking on this. It's now we can investigate every business, and half of them aren't going to file this BOI. So we have this immediate in to say, oh, you haven't filed this. And so we've got you on a violation immediately. We've got you. So now you can't argue with everything else we're going to ask for. And so I think that screams of classic government overreach.
In Texas, we're very much anti-federal government. U.S. District Court judge agreed. And he says that FinCEN, you just don't have that kind of power under either the Constitution's Commerce Clause or its Necessary and Proper Clause. Those are the two clauses within the U.S. Constitution that the feds usually use to get their claws into things, right? And when you think about these cases starting in the early 1900s, the federal government relied on this concept of interstate commerce because the Commerce Clause allows the federal government to regulate business among the states. But U.S. District Court judge out of Eastern District says, no, you've gone too far. You cannot ask these business entities to disclose their ownership. So that saved a lot of people because a lot of our clients, a lot of small business owners were scrambling in that regard, trying to get this done before the end of the year. So good news, if you're out there, you can take a wait and see approach over whether or not see what FinCEN's response is going to be or whether this gets appealed or not. Yeah. We'll keep an eye on it. All right, that brings us to our next legal news story. We're talking about Texas introducing a bill that would ban the sale of all forms of THC. Now, you may not know this, Chris, but in 2019, we had something called the Hemp Farming Act. And that allowed for the growing of hemp that did not exceed a 0.3% concentration of THC. You see all these cannabis stores all over Houston, Chris?
I do.
And when you go into these cannabis stores, you can buy all kinds of things, many of which you can ingest. And the gummies, the drinks, the whatever, they're all legal because they contain less than 0.3% concentration of THC. You're pretty good at math, Chris.
I am.
If a gummy contains one gummy contains 0.3% of THC or less, you could get or ingest a lot of THC into your body by eating multiple gummies, right?
Stands to reason.
Yeah. Or you could drink multiple THC beverages. So that's really been the problem. You're having people ingest large amounts of THC based on ingesting small incremental amounts, right? It's like
Is that really what they're doing? That sounds crazy.
No, it's like that guy. It's Christmas time. It's like that guy at the Christmas party who thinks he's on a diet, or the lady who's going back to the dessert table and she keeps getting like a quarter of a piece of pie or half a piece of pie. She's just making more trips to the dessert table.
Yeah, I'm not kidding when I say I don't know anything about this, but I would think that it wouldn't work. It would only work. Concentration is how it works, not quantity. If you smoke terrible marijuana or did drugs of low quality, I don't think doing more of them gives you a better high. That's why you spend the money for the better stuff. But maybe that's my education. I don't know.
I think it's exactly like Bud Light or Miller Lite. If it doesn't Bud Light, light beer, low calorie beer, doesn't it have a lower concentration of alcohol?
Slightly, but maybe you're right. This is news to me. I am surprised that is what people think. I would not think it would work that way. I didn't think this was real THC. I thought Delta 9 was something else. You said hemp. I thought hemp was not real THC.
No, Delta 9 is the scientific term for THC. That's all it is. Yeah, we've done extensive work on this in previous shows. Austin and I have. And what the data we're finding is that the marijuana that like Bob Marley smoked in the 80s, or the marijuana that your dad smoked at Woodstock, okay, that is not near as potent as the THC concentrations today. They're now just seeing that these young people, not necessarily young people, but mostly young people that started doing this stuff in their early 20s or even their teens, they are having just these terrible side effects, like they're having psychotic episodes. This is a real problem that people, I think, around the country are not seeing. And Texas wants to do something about it. Texas wants to walk this back and close some of these loopholes. So you've got Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick announced Senate Bill 3, banning all forms of THC. So that's bad news for THC users. And here's why. I just learned this, Chris. You may not know this. We're in legislative session, obviously, this year, starting in January for our Texas legislature. We mentioned on previous shows the Texas legislature only meets every 2 years. And this year, there's just a sweeping, just like how Trump swept the presidential election, they're sweeping conservative power in Texas. Now, Texas has always been a Republican state, but it's pushed even further right after this election cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now you have, and I did not know this until recently, the lower the number of a bill, the more attention it's going to get. So when you see something like Senate Bill 3, that's a priority bill. If you see like House Bill 1050, that's like a joke bill, right? Somebody is just doing it. Like we talked about some crazy high numbered bill in a previous show where some Texas local legislature, there was still some law in the books, whereas if you were impotent, your wife could divorce you in the family code. So this guy was passing a bill to remove that law where if you were impotent, your wife had no grounds for divorce. And it was a high numbered bill because it was crazy.
Right.
So this is a low number bill. So this is going to get a look. And if this passes, I think all of these cannabis stores and all that are just going to be done for. So the counter argument, and I don't know, tell me if you buy this, Chris, because you and I live in Houston. The counter argument is all these cannabis stores, they generate all these employees and income for the economy, and we're better off if you close them down. It's really going to have a long-lasting economic effect.
I agree. It's conflicting. I think one of the hallmarks of being a free market capitalist is being able to say, I don't like it to a lot of things, but simultaneously saying, I don't like government regulation. So the fact that I don't like it isn't going to stop me or compel me to tell you that the government needs to stop it. So I hate that they're on every corner. I think it looks ridiculous. I think it's a bad reflection on society that there's enough market for this, but I guess you could say the same about liquor stores. And I do drink Bud Light, as you said.
We're not going to talk about how much Bud Light, but all right, we got to keep going. That brings us to our next section, which is our legal questions section, okay? And the first thing we're answering is, how do you keep owners of an LLC in Texas anonymous? And there's no accident that we're answering this today, because it was going to be nearly impossible to keep them anonymous if we had to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act, because we would have had to disclose all of the owners to a corporate registry maintained by the Department of Treasury. But now that our friend in the Eastern District has shot that down, we can go back to telling and recommending to people how you keep your LLC anonymous. Have you done one of these at the firm? We actually do these quite frequently. So where the guy calls in, I want an anonymous LLC.
We set it up as a manager-managed LLC, and so you only have to name the managers, and you have a manager that is not an owner, and then you have the members confidential because you don't have to disclose the members at that point. You just disclose the manager.
That's exactly right. So that's the way we do it in Texas. And when you file the certificate of formation, you're not required for a manager managed LLC. You're not required to list the members in that public certificate of formation document. You just list the manager. The manager does not have to be an owner. The manager can just be a governing person, in the same way that a board member on a corporation does not have to own shares of that corporate stock. Yeah, you make it manager managed. You pick out a friend, maybe a trusted attorney that does a lot of work for the company. And then once you get it formed, in the background and in the privacy of your office, you bang out the operating agreement and you list the members and the actual owners and the operating agreement, and that never goes public. So that's how you do that. A lot of people will then ask about these public information reports. And if you're maintaining your LLC, you're supposed to file these public information reports every year, and you don't actually list the members in the public information report of a manager managed LLC. You just list the manager, so you can keep it confidential that way as well. So that's the best way to keep LLCs confidential in the state of Texas. All right, and that brings us to our next legal question. Does Texas have a state tax on business entities? We get this question a lot. Have you had clients ask you this before, Chris?
I think they ask just generally like what it costs to run a business or what are the fees and stuff. It's been my experience that most businesses don't have to pay anything.
We do have a tax regime in Texas. It's called the franchise tax. It does not have anything to do with McDonald's or Wendy's franchises. It is a tax for the privilege of operating an entity. And good news, as Chris mentioned, most businesses small businesses anyway, fall way under the threshold. For 2024 and 2025, the no tax due threshold is $2,470,000. That's a lot of money for a small business. If you have revenue under about $2.5 million, you're not paying a dime. And it used to be you would have to file this no tax due form, which was complicated in itself to even calculate what your threshold amount was. But the legislature cleaned that up a bit, and they said now 2024 or after, you don't even have to file that. So it's gotten real easy. But you still have to file those public information reports where you list who your governing persons are. So remember to do that. If you don't, you're going to have problems. You could forfeit your entity, and that's certainly bad. All right, so we've covered our legal questions. We've knocked those two out. That brings us to my favorite part of the show, which is the Rant and Rave section. And Chris, I know you said you're not a current event guy. You've not been following this, but did you at least know that Joe Biden pardoned his son, Hunter Biden?
I saw that on Sunday. I thought that was curious that it was done on Sunday. I thought there might be something to that, like trying to sneak it in there. But yes, I saw it.
Yeah. So Hunter, he was convicted of tax evasion and then lying about having a gun on some type, maybe lying about being a convicted felon or admitting he had a gun on some sort of gun application, something like that, right? Then Joe Biden pardons his son. I'm not that bothered by it, okay? I'm more bothered by all the times that Joe Biden has lied about it and the administration has lied about his intentions of pardoning his son. So we've got some kind of a little history on this. 2 weeks before Biden was sworn into office, remember, we're transitioning from the whole Trump January 6th fiasco. So Biden takes office with a mandate and a proclamation to restore democracy. And he says he's going to pursue a restoration of democracy, of decency, of honor, of respect, and rule of law. Okay. So now, fast forward to him pardoning his son, Hunter Biden. That sounds like just a gigantic kind of hypocrisy, just complete hypocrite. People are upset about it. But then also throughout this whole time that Biden is running for office, all the press and everybody, they're asking him, oh, are you going to pardon your son Hunter if he gets convicted? And Biden's every time is no. And then the press secretary I don't know how to pronounce her name, if it's Karen, Corinne, Jean-Pierre. Every time they ask her, no. I've answered this question before. This is her speaking. I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear. I said no. That was in September 2020. And then it just really keeps going and going, how many times Biden and the administration has said they're not going to pardon Hunter Biden. So it just goes on. Do you have the legal precedent? Can you quote that section, Chris? That we want to tell people where the presidential power comes from to grant pardons.
The president's power to grant pardons is outlined in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution. He shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment.
And there you have it. It's pretty clear. If you're the president, undisputed, you have the power for any federal crimes. That's not state. That's why Trump could not pardon himself for the whole New York hush money case thing, because that was state. But this is federal. What was against Hunter Biden was federal. So Joe Biden has the complete undisputed right to pardon him. This is more of an ethical question. To me, so what? An old man pardons his son for nonviolent crimes, the last act before retiring. What's the big deal? If your son, Chris, I know you've got a son, he's a very young child now. If you were elected president of the United States and your son was later found guilty of tax evasion and lying on about possession of a gun, nonviolent crimes, and you were never running for office again, would you pardon him?
I'll just say yes. I don't know. I'm not the president. I don't know what goes into that kind of stuff. I would think I would want to protect my son, but
I probably would.
I don't want to say yes now and then have you accuse me of lying in 30 years when I don't do it.
You can use wiggle room. As lawyers, we're excellent at talking out of both sides of our mouth. So my take on it is, what's the big deal? Delaware gun charge. Okay, there was a federal gun charge. He was addicted. He admits to possessing a gun for 11 days. That really, and I did this research earlier on in a previous show. That is a very obscure federal law. And I looked at that, and it was very rare to prosecute that. So I'm a Hunter fan or a Hunter proponent on that one. But the tax case is a bit trickier because it really was undisputed that he evaded like $1.4 million in tax. And that's much worse. And the federal sentencing guidelines, those recommend multiple years in prison for that. I did come across this in my research, and I did not know this. Did you know that talking about presidential pardons, did you know that Bill Clinton pardoned his half-brother Roger Clinton for cocaine from the 80s? I didn't know that. So
I feel like I probably heard that in the 90s. I'm sure Rush Limbaugh mentioned it, so I'm sure I heard it.
Yeah. Well, there's some precedent. These presidents are pardoning relatives. I don't know if you have a brother, Chris, but I'm not going to ask you if you'd pardon him if he blew a little coke if you're president, but maybe you would. So
why do we even give them that power is the better question.
That was our founder. That was our founders, our sacred United States Constitution that has worked so well. And I guess the idea of checks and balances, and our founders saw fit to have this as a balance of power. Donald Trump pardoned his son-in-law's father, Charles Kushner. You heard of him, Chris? So
I know Jared is. I guess that's his dad.
That's his dad. And Trump has him picked to be the ambassador to France. And Charles Kushner was convicted of illegal campaign contributions, tax evasion, and witness tampering related to he had hired a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, which is just messed up because I guess that's his sister. So he's hiring the prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law into having an affair related to the marriage between his sister and his brother-in-law. And then he does a bunch of witness tampering. So that sounds really bad. And not only does he get a pardon, he is now also being appointed as the ambassador to France. So there you go. This Biden, the Democrats are furious about Joe Biden pardoning Hunter Biden because they think it's basically a gift to Trump. And you know who Trump wants to pardon when he first takes office, right, Chris?
I do know the answer. I can't think of it though.
It's all those January 6th rioters.
But he said he would pardon. He said he might pardon some, but not all. So if he pardons all of them, you're going to call him a liar?
Oh, good point. Hey, he's going to, yeah, to your point, he's going to pardon some of them. And the Democrats are calling it a gift. We'll see how that plays out. I really don't care for nonviolent crimes. I think that's where I come down on it. It's a nonviolent crime. It's a presidential power. I'm not saying I condone it. I'm not saying I condone witness tampering. I'm not saying I condone lying on a gun application or tax evasion, but it's in the Constitution. The president has that power. And if you don't like it, we can go to the polls and we can vote for the next man up or woman up, and we can vote for a new party. We have that right as Americans. But certainly this power is being used somewhat unethically here on both sides of the aisle would be my conclusion. All right. That brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silverman. Chris Hield has been my very gracious stand-in co-host for Austin Black. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. As a reminder, nothing in this show is to be considered legal advice, and this has all been for entertainment purposes only. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com and tell us you want it publicly answered in the podcast. We will do our best. Everybody have a great rest of your week. Bye, everybody.